Hey guys, this is Mert Tansu of Tansu Knives, and today's video I'll be talking about how much steel we need for our chef knives. And in the first part, I'm going to talk about the stock removal. Calculating how much steel we need for stock removal is the easiest. So here I'm holding a stencil I made. This is my version of Masamoto case. It's actually Masamoto case being a profile after the French sabatier. It's like a long and slender knife. This is 250 millimeters at the edge and 50 millimeters at the heel height. And I'm allowing about 10 to 30 millimeter neck, which is also known as emoto in Japanese knife terminology, and at least 10 centimeters of tang. So 50 mil. So let me measure how much steel I need to make this knife. So if I want to make this knife, I need at least, comes to 39, I need about 38 to 40 centimeters of steel. And if you're to buying steel in stock length, I think they come about 90 to 100 centimeters if I'm not mistaken. So what I'll be doing is if I buy that bar, I'll put my stencil on the top corner and then I'll flip my stencil like this, and I'll use this gap for the tang of my other knife, and from 80 centimeters I'll be getting 2 chef knives, and the rest of the bar, whatever you want to do, like a small knives, paring knives, whatsoever. But saying that I haven't bought bars of steel for a long time. If I'm going to make a stock removal knife, it's usually stainless steel, I'll be buying a sheet of a steel. Buying sheet is way more cheaper than buying a bar of steel, and I think it comes like if you're buying a bar of steel, if it's $100, buying a sheet might cost 3 times, but you'll get 5 to 6 times more knives. So my recommendation will be to buying a sheet of steel, and I've been buying my sheets of steel from Gameko Artisan Supplies. And other than that, if you want to buy bars of steel, you can definitely do it. If you don't want to invest too much, Gameko carries them as well as Nordic Edge carries them, carries the bars of steel as well. And that's Kaya, barking at neighbor's dog. And second part, I'm going to talk about how much steel we need for our forged knives. So if you're coming from a stock removal, you need to see how much, you need to see the knife in there to actually starting a bit of a thicker material, and then you're trying to stretch it out. It was always a hassle at the beginning, how much steel I need. So I'm using a system I use in the kitchens. So when we used to do big functions and big parties, let's say you need 40 steaks and you need to cut up 40 steaks. So what you do is you weigh the steak that you have. Let's say I'm doing a ribeye. Let's say it came out 5 kilo. It's usually less, but let's say it's 5 kilos. And if I need 300 gram steaks each, I'll divide that 5 kilo to 300. So there'll be 18 plus 200 grams. So I'll take the steak, I'll wrap it up tightly, and I'll write 18 on it, knowing that I need to get 18 perfect pieces out of it plus 200 gram of wastage or 200 gram to be used for something else. So I have a similar approach with knife making. So if I'm buying a steel, regardless of the thickness, and for forging, I like to at least start with the 4 mil, 5 mil better if I'm doing it by hand. So I'll buy a steel and I'll put the steel on a scale. So my method and my formula is, if I'm making a 240 millimeter gyuto, and if I want to do a forge finish, that's going to require the minimal amount of grinding, and I add 30% more of that. So 240, I add 30% of it on top of it. So it becomes 320. So for 240 millimeter hidden tang chef knife for gyuto, I need at least 320 grams of steel. But this means I have no room for an error. I cannot make any mistakes. If I forge perfectly with the taper and everything, I need 320 grams of steel. If I want to have a knife that I'm going to completely grind it, like leave a polished whole thing rather than just leaving with the forge finish, then this becomes more like a 350, because I also like to allow some extra, because you don't want to be cutting too close and having a decarb near the tip. And if I want to make an integral knife, I double the length of the knife edge, and then I turn it into grams. So for 240 millimeter knife, if I want to turn it into integral, I need 480, at least 500 grams to be on the safe side. I managed to get a 480 integral in 240, but your forging has to be spot on. You'll be safer at 500, 520. And if you want to, I mean, 520, 530, you're not wasting much steel, but it's good to know how much exactly steel you need. Especially, let's say, you're making yourself a nice pattern welded steel. Like I got one bar here, for example, and this bar needs to last me 2 orders. And I made the steel, I got the layer count exactly what I wanted, and then I weighed it. So this steel here, I don't know if you can see, 1,180 grams. And I need 1 kilo of steel for 2 custom orders, and I got exactly the amount I need. Because with the stockroom, with the mono steel, it's not an issue, but if you're preparing a certain steel like this one, or if I'm making my pull out, my crucible steel, I don't want to do all the melting, forging, coming to a point to realize, oh, I wish I had 100 grams more to be able to extend it, or sometimes you're getting too thin, you're not meeting the parameters. So if I was to make a 270 millimeter slicer, I'll still need about 320 to 350 grams of steel. So chef knives ratio, if I want to change that ratio for a slicer one size bigger uses the same steel as chef knife. For example, if I want to make a 240 slicer, I'll need as much as steel I need for 210 millimeter knife. Let's do the calculation for 210 millimeters of chef knife. If I added the 30% on top of it, I need about 280 to 300 grams of steel to be able to get 210 millimeter chef knife. But same amount of steel will give me 240 millimeter slicer. I hope this makes sense. And so, as I said, if I was forging by hand, I'll be starting 4 to 5 millimeter thick steel. And since I've been doing all my forging with the power hammer, I like to start at 7 till 10 millimeter steel. The reason that I don't want to use 4 to 5 millimeters is the thinner the steel, the faster it loses temperature. So if I'm starting with the 4 mil, by the time I start tapering my spine or tapering the top, my steel gets cold. So I rather start with the really thick steel. Like this is actually, I mean, this one is close to an inch, about like 20, probably 25 mil actually. Let me measure it. This is 25, yeah, this is about an inch thick steel. So if I'm forging integral, I like to have a 1 inch thick steel, but if I'm doing a normal like hidden tech knives, 10 millimeter, 13 millimeter seems to be the ideal. They be holding the heat better, and I can manipulate them, especially the geometry, a lot better versus starting with the 4-5 mil steel. Because if I start with the 4-5, it's going to take me longer to forge because I have to constantly go in to heat, come back, and by the time the power hammer ram is lowering down, the steel is getting cold. So that's why I like to start with the 10-12 mil for my forging. I hope this makes sense, and if you guys have any question, hit me up, and hope to see you next time. Bye.